Good afternoon and welcome to this Euractiv debate on gender equality in the workforce, how to build on recent progress to achieve true parity. Our event today is supported by Zurich, and you can follow the debate at hashtag #EADebates and tweet your comments using the hashtag. Our social media team will respond. To ask questions, go to the chat section and use the ask button. I'm Brian Maguire. I'll be leading the discussion today. Gender equality is a core value of the EU, a fundamental right and a key principle of the European Pillar of Social Rights. The EU is a global leader in gender equality. 14 of the top 20 countries for gender equality worldwide are EU member states. But overall, the index finds that no country has achieved full gender equality. No surprise there. Women are still underrepresented in the labour market, with a 12% gender employment gap, and women also earn less than men per hour, and the gender pay gap in the EU stands at 16%. It has barely changed in the last decade. The gender pension gap is even higher at 30%. The European Commission's gender equality strategy includes legislative proposals for achieving pay transparency, and key to this progress is the equal sharing of care responsibilities. So today we discuss how EU member states can achieve full gender equality in the workplace and support this ambition outside of the EU as well. We have a big panel with us today, and we have 6 speakers, starting with Katarina Ivankovic-Knežević. She's the Director of Social Affairs at DG Employment at the European Commission. Karen van der Kerkhoven, she's the Head of Unit at Gender Equality at DG Just, the European Commission. MEP Stelios Kimpopoulos, he's a member of the Employment Committee at the European Parliament. Julia Balbucci, she's the Vice President of the European Economic and Social Committee. Joanna Maycock, Secretary General of the European Women's Lobby. And Katja Roth-Palanda, Group General Counsel at Zurich. Good afternoon to all of you. Thanks so much for taking the time to be with us. We are going to kick off with 60 seconds elevator pitch, your key message for today. And after that, we'll go into a discussion, and our audience can also send questions as soon as they like, and we'll put those to the panel during the course of the conversation as well. So, Catherine, you want to kick off with your 60 seconds?
Well, thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be with you today, and thank you, Brian, for moderating this wonderful panel. So, well, the question is, why are we still here? And it's obviously for the reason and for the fact that despite all the progress that we have made in the last decades, the gender inequalities in employment and pay are still persisting. We see that on all 3 gaps, the employment gap, the pay gap, the pension gap, and rightly, as you pointed out, the pension gap is still extremely high. It goes from 30, but in some member states it reaches more than 40%. So while the gaps are still persisting, we will have to continue working very hard in order to correct it. The point that I would like just to make in this introduction part is that despite beside the gender equality strategy, few weeks ago, actually 2 weeks ago, we have adopted an important document which is called an action plan on the European Pillar of Social Rights. And this action plan sets some important targets that we want to reach up until 2030. One of them is also referring to the employment rate, and with a sub-target that is referring to the gender employment gap. And indeed, we are striving to have at least halve the gender employment gap by 2030. So I would stop here, and there will be plenty of opportunity to further discuss.
There will be. Thank you, Karen. Katarina. Karen, over to you, 60 seconds.
Yes, thank you, and good afternoon to everybody. I'm happy to be here, and I think it's a good time indeed, because I think it's unprecedented times, I think, for women's rights, at EU level. I think gender equality has never been so high on the political agenda. We have for the first time, a commissioner for equality, including gender equality. And we have, for the first time, a gender balanced leadership at EU level. So this is quite unprecedented. At the same time, we have a pandemic that has painfully brought to light the large inequalities that still persist, and that Women are hit hard on the labor market. Women are hit as victims of violence. Women are lacking in all those bodies that take decisions regarding the pandemic. So this shows the urgency, I would say, of all the actions we have foreseen under the gender equality strategy. It was adopted 1 year ago, just before the pandemic. But actually, it's all its actions are just extremely relevant, and the last year shows why. So the recovery should be women-led and women-inclusive, and I think we have a lot of work to do.
Thank you, Karen. Stelios, over to you, 60 seconds.
Thank you very much, Brian. From the outset, I would like to thank Euractiv for the invitation to speak at such a timely and important issue. The European Union, since its inception, has been a project based on equality of opportunity, allowing all citizens to reach their full potential in a peaceful and prosperous continent. Women are at the core of that vision, and enabling women to reach higher and go further has been a European ideal for decades. This is something that we at the EPP Group have underlined in the context of our most recent position paper on gender equality. Unfortunately, we still have a long way to go to address gender inequality in the workplace, not only on issues of payment and career progression in the workplace, but more critically on how to ensure a safe workplace. In this regard, I strongly support the efforts on building an inclusive economy which encourages women's employment and entrepreneurship. At the same time, COVID-19 has once again shown the extra burden of women are faced with. We need to be mindful of the multiple roles and appropriately implement the existing EU and national legislation to ensure work-life balance. Last but not least, we need to be clear that harassment is not acceptable at the workplace, as well as a clear strategy to address the issue. I leave it at that as an introduction, and I look forward to the discussion.
Stelios. Joanna, 60 seconds.
Yes, thank you very much. So you rightly said at the beginning, Brian, that we've really stopped progressing on women's rights and gender equality in the European Union for more than a decade. But our members, women's organizations across Europe, continue to report to us on the devastating impact of the COVID pandemic on women and girls and on women's rights. So we can also see the COVID pandemic as a wake-up call, which has actually brought to the forefront inequalities in our society, particularly the inequalities between women and men. And we've seen the impact a decade of austerity measures had and how that impacted our public services, in which the majority of workers are women, and the services upon which women depend. So we can't let this happen again. Looking forward, we absolutely need to make sure that the recovery strategy coming out of COVID puts women and girls at its heart, and make sure that women and girls do not pay the price of the long-term socioeconomic consequences of the pandemic. Between lost earnings, lost jobs, the uneven distribution and extra burden of childcare and other care responsibilities, and the increase in violence against women and girls, women are at breaking point, and we expect actions. So the COVID recovery, our aim cannot be just stopping inequality from increasing due to the huge recession that people are predicting, but we actually need to seize the opportunity to bring transformational change to advance equality between women and men. And that means recognizing the contribution that women make to the economy, to the society, and in decision-making, including care. So yeah, we need a gendered recovery. We need a bold new care deal for Europe. We need to put women at the heart of decision-making in companies, in politics, and in designing the recovery. And we need action to fight violence against women and girls. I look forward to the debate.
Thank you, Joanna. Julia, 60 seconds.
Yes, can you? Hello.
Yeah, we can hear you. I think we lost you for a moment earlier, but we can hear you now.
Yes,
Go ahead.
exactly. I got lost. Sorry. So thank you for this invitation. I'm very happy to share with you this issue. And I would also like to ask ourselves how long it will take for achieving gender equality and gender balance. You know that women are mostly occupied in more precarious jobs and are less paid, and of course have also less possibilities than men, but at the same time women perform far more unpaid and invisible work than men. So we have to take into consideration this, and I also agreed with my previous panelists that say that gender equality must permeate national recovery plans, macroeconomic policy, and global development. The recovery plans are an opportunity to enact structural change for gender equality, because the pandemic has aggravated, as you know very well, the gender equality in our society. I am so as originally I am a trade unionist, so I am very interested in jobs, and I also think that this proposal of the European Commission, that the proposal for a directive for pay transparency, is a good start to tackle the gender pay gap. And however, this proposal still requires some fine tuning to be really effective. For example, in the world of SMEs, which correspond, as you know, to the 90% of Europe's economic activity. So, and just to finish, I would also like to say that the real parity can only be achieved through binding measures, and also establishing quotas in all sectors and in all companies and in all institutions. Thank you very much for your attention.
Julia, thank you. Finally, Katja, 60 seconds.
Thanks a lot. Hello, everyone. For Zurich, ensuring gender equality is not only a matter of fairness, but also a way to achieve business outcomes and goals. Zurich is taking its responsibility as a company with initiatives such as an annual audited review of equal pay for equivalent work. But we also have other strategies and tools implemented, such as a network for females. We try to remove every barrier. Our senior people speak frequently to share experiences and stories so that females can adapt and can see what others have done and learn. We also have, of course, a zero-tolerance approach to harassment and discriminatory treatment. As the speakers before me has already said, COVID-19 has made the situation worse. There is an increased burden of unpaid care, which has pushed some women out of the labor force, while some mothers are reducing hours or pausing careers. At the same time, women are overrepresented in occupation and sectors hit especially hard during the pandemic. There is also evidence of increased mental health issues due to the pandemic, and women appear to be among the most affected, which also puts their career at risk. I want to add to what the others have already said, that for Zurich it seems to be important that full gender equality can only be achieved by public-private cooperation. So everyone needs to step up, and one alone cannot achieve enough. Thanks a lot, and I'm looking forward to the debate.
Thank you, Katja. Katerina, how do we get anywhere close to parity without quotas, which I know is blocked at the moment? But how do we do that? And what role do transparency and binding accountability have to play in this path? Katerina.
Well, thank you, Brian. I'm sure that Karen, whose proposal this is, might fit in much better. I can only speak from the employment social policy side, and we see and we welcome very much the proposal of the draft directive. We know that in the past we have seen similar tries and similar success or failures, I have to say, and be very frank with all of us. But it really is a step forward, and I'm sure in this respect, and with this step forward, and also by promoting the gender mainstreaming, by securing indeed that our policies and actions do take on board this aspect fully, and that we do not preach just gender mainstreaming, but that we really implement it in the policies, also with some other mainstreaming exercises, if I may say so, like the disability mainstreaming, taking care, as the Commission has decided with the whole Union of Equality, to have the intersectional approach, meaning that really, when we look at the person, we take on board all of the different identities and the different aspects that person is facing. And if we continue with a disability mainstreaming and the gender mainstreaming, we might get closer to the parity. But you are right, and I would fully agree that maybe those who have introduced quotas, and we have seen quota systems working in some member states. We know that, for example, for the employment of the persons with disabilities, some member states have very successful quota, where if you employ more than certain number of employees, you need to have a certain number or percentage of persons with disabilities. Maybe the time to reflect on this question is coming. So I'm also very happy and looking forward to the current thoughts and ideas about the pay transparency.
Thank you, Karen. The idea that this is going to move smoothly when there's been so much historical opposition to women's equality in the legislative process, what are you optimistic this is going to be different this time?
I think if you work on women's rights, you need to be an eternal optimist, no? For sure. I'm not going to predict it will be different this time, but I think it is very clear, particularly on the decision-making side. I think it's very clear there is no change without legislative intervention, and that is shown across all the data that you can see in the EU. We remain stuck at 29% of representation of women in the boards of the largest listed companies only. You can imagine for the others. We remain at like 8% of CEOs across Europe. This is just not credible, yeah, in a society. And I would like to somehow also dispel the misgivings that exist around quota. Quota is not about getting incompetent people in a post, yeah. The legal regime in Europe is quite strict. You need people of equal merit, and only when people are of equal merit and you have a male and a female candidate, you may, as a positive action, promote or give preference to the female candidate. But the basic line is that they are of equal merit. So I think there are a lot of misgivings about what quota actually are, and perhaps we should rather talk about targets or something similar. And as you know, we still pursue this directive. We don't give up, and we definitely hope that things will be moving in the not so far, hopefully, not so far future. As to pay transparency, here equal pay has been in the treaty since 1957, and you see that when you have this very broad principle to which everybody agrees, yeah, when you look at in practice how it is implemented, you realize that truly it's not that easy to know what it really means. What does it mean to pay someone equally for doing the same work? What does it mean? And it's not only about an individual that in a particular case, an individual woman who is being paid less of the man sitting in the office next to her doing the same work or work of equal value. So it's not only about these cases of individual discrimination, but it's really about the bias that is embedded in pay setting structures, and that has historically grown like that. It's often not even conscious, not even intentional. And so,
but isn't this exactly the problem? It's not necessarily intentional, because this is a cultural behavior. And as Commissioner Vestager said, I think it was on Women's Day as well, men have had an informal quota forever. And to address that
Yes.
balance, men need to take a back seat and allow everything for women for the next 70 years. That's how imbalanced the system is right now. I take the point that you need to be an eternal optimist with this as well, but Ruth Bader Ginsburg was exactly that, an eternal optimist. And to give her credit, I ask for no favour for my sex. All I ask of our brethren is that they take their feet off our necks. I would like to see that perhaps on the next European Commission policy document related to gender equality. Maybe the message will go through a little more clearly. Julia, Iceland already does this with pay transparency, equal pay for equal work. It's mandated for companies to provide this. It's structured. And there is a way forward, just like Karen was saying. You have to be able to see what's happening. And talking about quotas is maybe an awkward thing, but if it's data-based and the candidates are of equal capability, there's a way forward with this. How long will it take us to get the data ready for these decisions to be taken in a fair and consistent way, Julia?
So, thank you very much. I think that to achieve really gender equality in employment, it is necessary to end to the horizontal segregation because, women have to be valorized for the work they perform. In many cases in female-dominated sectors, and at the same time, we have to practice gender-neutral hiring. So I think that it is really necessary to improve transparency and fairness in job evaluation systems, and taking also decisive measure to realize pay transparency in all spheres of the work to enforce the principle of equal pay for equal work or work of equal value. It is a question, it is an issue of justice. And I also think that in those countries where the collective bargaining is very well developed, it is maybe easier to to go on with this pay transparency.
So Stelios about this as well. Stelios, this is a question of justice. Why are we having to deal with trade unions to get this done? Why is this not something which is rigidly, strictly enforced through the courts, and where there is a failure to comply with this requirement? Karen was saying this has been in the treaties for a very long time. Why is this not rigorously prosecuted through the courts? Stelios.
Thank you, but I cannot. Very easy to answer on this question. I think that it is a multi-level problem that we should face all together. From my point, as another speaker said, it is really unacceptable to have women paid less for the same roles than their male peers, but also not having access to information on the reasons behind these disparities. In this regard, as I said previously, the pay transparency measures proposal is a very good first step. And because I am optimistic, I believe so that we can do better. As Parliament, we will scrutinize the proposal and come up with a report that increases transparency, but also improves access to justice for victims of pay discrimination. On the other hand, we need to urge company boards to apply transparent selection criteria for candidates and to favor the represented sex when there is a choice between two equally qualified applicants. So I think that it's legislative, private sector, and also it's a political issue.
Simone Weil said, "The equality is the public recognition effectively expressed in institutions and manners of the principle that an equal degree of attention is due to the needs of all human beings." Joanna, Angela Merkel said on Women's Day that in terms of COVID, that the lion's share of the caring system is still massively on with women, and this has got to change. We have Christine Lagarde saying that changing the ECB culture is very difficult and very slow. You have Angela Merkel, the Chancellor for so many years, still lamenting the lack of progress as well. How do we change this care responsibility for care structure as well? Because this is one of the fundamental elements that underpins the overall change, don't you think?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I want to just pick up on what Karen said. Actually, what's in the Treaty of Rome is equal pay for work of equal value. And that question of value is really, really important. And actually what we find is that women's contribution, women's work, women's contribution to society is consistently undervalued or second place. So we're talking about deep structural changes that are needed to address that. So we need to start thinking about the value we place on women's contribution, the value we place on care, both the unpaid care, which predominantly falls on the shoulders of women, and also the paid work in the care sectors. We know that more than 75% of health workers in Europe are women, more than 90% of childcare workers are women. The vast majority of workers across the care sectors, including elder care or care for persons with disabilities, are women. Often also women who are themselves minoritized in some way in society. So migrant women or women who've moved across borders in Europe. They're really consistently underpaid, very often on precarious contracts, very vulnerable to unemployment or being shifted between jobs. And until we start recognizing that care is not an afterthought to the economy, but is actually the heart of society, and that the contribution of women and the importance of care is really the backbone of society. Nothing else works if we don't put care at the center. So we're talking about really a shift in thinking about the economy, not as growth and GDP and production, but actually about well-being and care, and putting the care of ourselves, of each other and the planet at the center of the picture, really measuring our economies on that basis. And COVID presents an opportunity to do that, because I think all of us have been forced to rethink what care is and how important it is in our societies and our world, how important health is, how important childcare is, how important elder care is. And we really need to really create an economy for the 21st century and a society for the 21st century with care, with women at their heart. And women for that need to be part of the decision-making processes. That means they need to be included.
Let me put this to Katja. Yes, let me put this to Katja now. So first of all, diversity on the board means profitability by and large as well. This is well documented. Statistics are there to show it. So it's a fundamental corporate failure to have a lack of diversity on your board, and that we still see that 7.5% of boards executive level are women. This is a massive disparity and a massive failure for corporate capacity, productivity, and even we don't need to put it in social justice terms. So how do you at Zurich see this? How do you see this in terms of an economic argument aside from the justice, Katja?
Absolutely, I completely agree with you. It's also, and even more so, an economic argument. And I'm really proud about Zurich to say, because we have more than 50% of our females, of our board members are females. So I think at Zurich we stand quite well. But as the speakers before said, I think it's a company and economic point of view, and it's a societal point of view. I think for companies, we can start already with the hiring. We should make sure that we have that we offer every job part-time, that we have an equal hiring slate so that we have the same amount of female and male candidates, that the interview panel is occupied with females and males. I think also that we need to have like a flex work, which is important to help females. But then, as my speakers before me said, it's also, and even more so, a society question. I think it helps also females if there is a parental leave, so that also dads can take time off, and that we recognize that it's also very good if fathers stay at home. So I think it's really, we need to find a balance between push females more to have more executive position met by females, to have quotas. I'm in favor for quotas, but at the same time, I think we really need to recognize that the people who stay at home to take care of the children, that this is really very important and valued work as well. And I think this later part sometimes gets forgotten in our society.
Thank you. Karen, in terms of education, if we're going to change society's approach to this, there's got to be an educational role here too. What does the strategy say about how we change through education?
Yes, I think all these inequalities that we have been hearing and listening to in the labor market, in violence, in decision making, wherever, all of them are based on this kind of stereotypes that exist in our society. Yeah? Our societies, our cultures. What do we expect from women? What do we expect from men? And so these are at the basis of all these inequalities. And so if you want to go really to really tackle the inequalities, whatever measures we will take will not be successful if we also not at the same time tackle these stereotypes. And that's actually what we in the strategy propose. We propose that to tackle these stereotypes, we envisage and we are working on the preparation of a campaign that will focus in particular on youth, because that's where you start changing these stereotypes and biases that we all have still in our society. So we have an EU-wide campaign that we will launch hopefully by the end of this year or next year, but which we hope in an event will really be extended and translated and taken over more largely, because that's where we will get the change from. You're right.
Thank you. Please, to our audience, keep sending in questions. We have some in already. We'll come to those in just a moment. And if you want to address a specific question to one of the panelists in particular, please mention that in your question as well. And we'll come back to those in just a moment. Katerina, let's stay on the education side for a moment as well. What needs to be done in terms of translating these aspirations into an inherent attitude within Europe? Let's start with Europe. Katerina.
Well, Brian, you have asked a very wide question. Yes, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
Do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear.
Okay, perfect, thanks. Sorry, I've been having huge problems with the connections the whole day. So, and I just said that you really asked very difficult questions to reply, because it goes so widely, and education, as Karen has mentioned, is extremely important. I can tell you what we are doing for the moment. For example, we are just about to adopt another initiative at the college, which is the European Child Guarantee. In European Child Guarantee, we pay particular attention to access of children in need, and children in need are children at risk of poverty and social exclusion, into different areas and different services, including education, but starting from early childcare education, and then health, nutrition, which is not really relevant for this discussion, but this part for inclusion in the education is extremely important, because we need to start from the early age. There are different elements that we need to have in mind. One is definitely securing that parents can work, so that we have sufficient number of preschool institutions, that we have a sufficient and well-run educational systems with a quality education and quality care for children. The children can also take part in out of school activities, either organized by school or in some different manners, in order really to have the possibility for parents to work. Another important aspect that we see that is very problematic in all member states, I would dare to say, is that very often the working hours of institutions are not, educational institutions are not in line with the needs of parents, are not in line with the working hours of parents. And this is something what needs to be changed. Then we also, Karen knows that very well because we negotiated together the Work-Life Balance Directive, where we introduced for the first time in the EU the parental leave, where fathers can take, will have to take sometimes off when the child is born. It's only it's 10 days, but even if for some it seems like only 10 days, it was very difficult to negotiate even those 10 days. And we also look forward to the better distribution between the work, between the family responsibilities between men and women. And our colleagues, as Karin has said, are invested a lot into it. Well, I touched only some elements, not to mention the minimum income, the minimum wage, the long-term
Let's go back to minimum wage
initiatives,
after. I want to touch
because
more
these
a bit
are
more. I want to touch more on the economic side a little bit later on as well. Julia, just to stay on education as well, with the murder in London by allegedly by the police officer this week as well, making the headlines, and the outpouring of bitterness that came from this too. Some of the things that struck me from the comments I read were educate your son. It's not about educating your daughter to do this or do that to protect yourself, but educate your son. This is not acceptable. This kind of behavior, this macho attitude that persists in society as well. Julia, how do we educate society in general to not be tolerant and not accept macho behavior, which ultimately leads perhaps to murder, but more frequently leads to harassment and to sexual assault?
Yes, thank you very much for this question. It's not easy to answer, but I just can say that, as someone already has said, that we need to introduce changes in our culture to break down gender stereotypes. This is the most important thing. It depends on all of us. I mean, it depends on the families, it depends on the parents, it depends on the spread culture of the society. And so I think that this is something that politics have to handle in a way. Of course, there is also the fact that how the society is structured, because if women have the role of taking care of people, so children, all father or mothers, people, ill people, and everything. So I mean, this is not right, because of course we need instead a systematic approach at EU level to care policies. And you know that in some countries there is a lack of social care institutions and bodies. So the burden of care it is for the most to women's shoulders. So this has to be changed, I think.
Okay.
And the pandemic has, of course, aggravated this situation.
Okay, thank you. I want to come to Kathleen in just a moment to talk about entrepreneurship and opportunities, particularly to finance for women as well. But Stelios, you're a psychiatrist, and when we talk about education and changing behavior in society, especially to do with attitudes towards sexuality, which you specialized in, and how we shift this mentality to base women's rights in part on men's acceptance of them as well. What needs to change from your perspective?
Well, I think that the aspect of education is the most the most vivid and the issue that it's in core of the gender stereotypes. If we work hard during within education, I think that we can challenge the stereotypes. This is the only way to allow girls and women to dream big, to fulfill their aspirations and realize their potential. We are living in an area that there is not limit. With the support of the help of AI, of digital area, and all these kind of support that exists from the technology, we can change the mind that girls and women are also acceptable and they have the abilities to do everything. As I said, we should leverage relevant policies and programs to improve entrepreneurship skills for women and break away from the stereotype that some jobs are only for men.
Okay.
I think that because you talk about education, also we can support these ideas from wide campaigns, as EDP has taken initiative for European Day of Work-Life Balance on the 20th of March, which
Thank
is
you.
thank you.
Thank you, Stelios. Joanna wanted to make a comment, then we'll go to Katja. Joanna.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to come back on the question you asked about violence against women and the tragic murder that happened in the UK last week. More than 50 women are actually murdered every week in Europe by their partner or former partner. This is something which should be, you talked about, Brian, you talked about women feeling bitter or an outpouring of bitterness. We're not bitter. We are really, really angry, and it's time for urgent action. This is just no longer acceptable and has never been acceptable, that women and girls live with violence, in fear of violence at the hands of men. And we need absolutely concrete action. Yes, we need education, but we also need legislation and we need justice. So we need our police and our judicial systems to actually implement laws that genuinely protect women from street harassment, from stalking, from online violence, from rape, from prostitution. And frankly, in Europe, we do not have the right legislative environment for correct action to take place. So we really need much more than just education. Education matters, but so does justice. And Stelios rightly talked about the impact of violence on women in the workplace. So that means sexual harassment at work, but also the impact of domestic violence and the wider culture and continuum of male violence against women, which impacts on all women. So we'd really like to see the EU take significant action, first to ratify the Istanbul Convention, but to go further than that and introduce a directive that really addresses all forms of male violence against women and girls, including sexual harassment, including sexual exploitation, including digital violence. And we're really looking forward to working with the Commission and the other institutions on introducing this new legislation in the coming years, which has been long, long overdue. Thank you.
Thank you. Just on the word bitterness, I use this in the context of anger and the sense, but I do think there's a notifiable difference in terms of how men perceive this in general. With the comments that I saw, it's yes, this is a justice thing, yes, it's bad, but I just don't see the same anxiety with men, which I think should be there. And that men don't, the comments that I read, men deal with this in a different perspective. They don't personalize this in the same way that women do, because women are the victims in this instance. And perhaps I think this is one of the reasons why men don't take this serious enough to change it quickly. If it was reversed, if men were suffering this, if men felt bitter or hard done by anything in society, the action would be taken much more quickly. Just on that, but the idea that women can progress without a broad change in society, I think we can deal with again. But in terms of opportunity, I want to switch a little bit more to the opportunity side of this discussion now. Katja, women don't get access to finance when it comes to entrepreneurship. Venture capital funding for women is about 7.1% in Europe. This is something which comes, again, from all the elements we've discussed. It's this informal quota, it's this boys network of who you know. It's not necessarily a conscious exclusion, but it exists. How do we correct that and give women the opportunity? Do we need a positive enforcement of financing for women in Europe as well?
Yes, I completely agree. I think we need to have positive enforcement of finance for women, and also accept that there needs to be some diversity. As said in my statement note, I think ensuring gender equality is not only a matter of fairness, it's really a matter of business development and business outcomes. And I don't know whether you know, but for example, the Women Matter report by McKinsey found in 2018 that closing the gender gap could raise Western Europe's annual GDP by 2.1 trillion by 2025. I think this clearly shows that a more equal world would be a more productive and profitable one. So I completely agree. Yes, absolutely.
From Zurich's perspective, how do you see it in terms of economic mechanics like minimum wage or other incentives in terms of financing childcare? How are there models which you think should be followed to enable this?
I think the model which we have, that we have gender equal pay transparency and that we audit it every year, I think that's a good start. But in addition, I think it would be really important that the companies work together and share their experience and what works best for them. I think for us, as said, the transparency in payment is one topic. And as said before, the hiring, the flexible work, the part-time possibility, the parental leave, these are all tools in which we believe very much. But we also think that we should share more our experiences and also enter into public-private partnerships.
Okay, Karen, 2.1 trillion euros by 2025 missing from the economy because we don't value women sufficiently within the workplace. How quickly can we get this transparency? And are you concerned that equal pay transparency and the auditing of it, as Katja mentions as well, gets fudged somehow because employers' federations perhaps are not too keen on the short-term implications of that?
Yes, I hoped we have been able to show with the proposal, and we made also an impact assessment accompanying that proposal. I hope that we have been able to show that there are substantial benefits to be derived from pay transparency. Benefits in terms of productivity, keeping your workforce motivated, and attracting female talent to your company. And at the same time, the measures that we have proposed, and I must say we have really carefully designed them, let's say, because we should all acknowledge that this was not an evident time to come with a proposal. On the one hand, we see that women have been hit so hard in the pandemic. On the other hand, also certain sectors of the economy are also seriously hit in the pandemic. So we designed these measures very carefully, and we've really looked at the costs and benefits of those measures. And frankly speaking, the measures that we propose, we truly believe they are not really costly. They are not disproportionately costly. Of course, the measures are not the same. They are based on, inspired by measures that exist at the national level. But if you take a country like, for instance, Germany, where you have a right, an individual worker has a right to request information on his or her pay, the cost of replying to such a request is 20 euros. I mean, it's only indicative, of course. The cost of doing an audit, like Zurich was mentioning, is more expensive, and we have chosen for a mechanism that can be done, a joint assessment that is done jointly by workers' representatives and employers. so which is less expensive. So I think we have done everything we can to balance the measures and to hopefully convince employers that there is merit in this, and in the longer term this is something beneficial. But for sure, up to now, I don't think we have much of the support from the business world, and I hope it will come.
Let me ask you, I want to go to some questions in just a second, but Karen, just to stay on that for a second, why is this lack of support from business persisting today? You know, as Katja said, the data is perfectly clear on this. If we're talking about rational people making rational economy, this should get done. What's your sense of opposition from the employers? Karen?
Well, I think we've heard many arguments. I think there is this general kind of, I would call it unease with the fact that there would be more transparency about pay. Now decisions about pay setting mechanisms, they're all a bit hidden in a kind of secrecy, and therefore also they leave a lot of discretion to employers, and I think there is a kind of unease in this reality that this would all be more transparent, at least to a certain extent, and I think that's the real underlying reason. Of course, the arguments we have heard about costs and burden, as I said, we can show that truly we can do this in a way which is not really costly and burdensome. We have heard concerns about privacy. Also there, I think we can take measures that ensure that your individual salary will not be out there on the web, or will not even be
let me come to that in just a moment as well.
Workers. So I think there are.
Sorry, I know there's a slight delay on this, Karen. Stelios, I'm going to take a question and I want to come back to you. You mentioned AI as well, which is something Commissioner Vestager mentioned on Women's Day as well, the role of technology in this. I wonder how you think this applies in the context of what Karen said about anonymizing data and how we can use tech for good in this instance as well. But let's go to a question from Esther Miriam Sent. Esther asks, which role do men have in supporting gender equality, which some of which we've touched on, for example, working in care jobs, working fewer hours, child care duties? Julia?
So
quick
I
comments
think
on that?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I completely agree that it is really important that men understands that this is not a women issue. This is an issue of everybody, and everybody, I mean, can take a part on this. And I am sure that new generations are more aware of this phenomena, and also more prepared on doing their part in the society. Of course, as I have already said before, it is a cultural issue. And of course, I also think that the pandemic has in a way aggravated the problem, because in a way families, men and women, have to be forced to stay home. And of course, this was very complicated for women also because of care responsibilities. But at the same time, it was also a problem for what concerns the gender-based violence, because of course, in the lockdown, this has brought to an increase of cases like this. And of course, this has much to do with men.
Thank you. We've Katerina, maybe take this quick answer in this from Anonymous. A good question could be how do we prove and demonstrate that our invisible work is essential? So how do we prove that the invisible work, I think is referring to care roles in particular, how can you prove the value of this? Katerina.
Well, I think one of the core questions is what do we consider as the work of equal value? And I think some of our panelists have mentioned many times what is the work of equal value. And I remember sometimes in early 2000s, long time ago, the ILO did a study on the work of equal value. And for me, one of the most striking, not surprises, but facts was that, for example, the work value according to the criteria they develop as a work of a teacher. And I'm pretty sure that we do lack such evaluation. We do lack really throughout the different settlements and different environments understanding on what is the work of equal value. So this is just one part of the equation. When it comes to the unpaid work or invisible work, indeed, Karen knows it very well, and our colleagues in the Commission, the AIG did a few years ago an analysis about unpaid work, which is, we know, 90% done by women. This unpaid work really goes wide range from different child caring or long-term caring responsibilities, or different choices or different tasks that women perform. And it's quite clear that the equation is not fair to women in this respect.
Okay.
Also, the other aspect mentioned already today several times is the professions which women choose and the professions in which women are, which are many times in low-paid sectors with a low salaries at the lowest scale. And if you want to go, for example, to the minimum income initiative, minimum wage initiative, which has a strong focus on women, and will have this strong repercussion on women.
Okay.
Even when we are setting minimum wages in our different member states, it still doesn't help because it's still the minimum wage. And the problem is that we do not want women to work in the minimum wage sphere.
Sure.
We want women to work throughout the payrolls, so to say.
Thank you. Stelios, let's come to the tech-driven solutions here as well. Maybe Katja can follow on this as well. How do you see AI as a solution here as well, or at least part of the solution? Stelios?
Well, I think that AI, it is very crucial issue for the future. But before I answer your question, I really wanted to understand that if we don't realize the different socioeconomic factors which prevent women from working and explore the limitation of active employment policies with particular emphasis on large families or parents with disabled children, we will reach a point that it will be the same as we discussed at this moment. We will have a point that there will be gender stereotypes, gender inequality, pay gap, and therefore we need first of all to understand what we have now, what do we have today. But for your question, I think that if we use correctly the AI, we can see miracles, and we can see to create a balance between men and women and jobs.
Thank you. Katja, part of the problem with AI is who codes it? Who's behind the potential for bias at the beginning? And your industry is a very data-driven industry, so you'll understand the implications is perhaps than most other industries, really. So how do we ensure that we're not encoding bias at the beginning? And how do we use AI for good to help solve this inequality issue?
Yeah, thanks a lot for the question. I mean, first, maybe let me say that I think the digitalization and the tech tools, they can help female in the workforce because it gives them more flexibility. But we as Zurich, we agree that we really need to be very careful to look at AI and whether it's in the benefit for the females or whether it's worth strengthening their situation. So we have entered into a research cooperation with the Smith School of Enterprise and the Environment at the University of Oxford to better understand the challenges around digitalization of the workplace and workforce protection, and in particular also IE. I think it's really important also that we have the right governance around IE and that we think about what information we feed the IE tools, the algorithm, and I think it's really important that we get this right, because the outcome might otherwise not be balanced and what might hurt the female progression and workforce.
Okay, Karen, on the same point, Commissioner Vestager touched on this as well. The Commission is bringing forward more proposals on AI and the guiding principles, the ethics behind this as well. I'm not going to ask you to comment on the technicalities of that, but just in terms of the general use of digitalization in the workforce, in public sector as well, what role does this have to play for the equality agenda?
Well, I think indeed it was said already. I mean, it can be play a big role in the sense that it helps flexibilizing jobs for women. But I think what is more important is the reverse of that question: is do we have today among the female workforce? Do we have all the skills and competences that are needed to be on board with this digital transition? And if you look at today, data say that it's like 90% of the jobs today require these digital skills. And we come back to the stereotypes. Yeah, women represent only, I think, 17% of the in the studies. Women still don't choose in the same to the same extent as men for STEM professions. So we come back to the stereotypes, and that's where I think we need to work. So not only this digital transition will help women indeed in being part of the labor market, but we need to ensure that they have all the skills and competences necessary to be part of that transition and not be left behind.
Yeah, this is a critical element, Katharina. The idea that being left behind as a consequence of stereotyping for young girls in particular. I can't do this job because that's a man's job. Now, Ursula von der Leyen, as president, has addressed this very clearly, that all jobs are for women. And the positive narrative and the communications that have to be addressed now. How do we in Europe address this with young women and girls looking for an aspiration for their career, that they say, I can do that job, there's no reason why not? Katharina.
Yes, indeed. And as President says, there is no job that women can't perform. And we always use these examples of pilots or astronauts. Maybe we should start using different examples as well. And it's true, and it's very, very true. And also what my previous speaker said about education and skills. And if we link it also with the debate and the discussion on the AI, and the point that yes, we are going to lose some jobs are going to be replaced, but what will we do in the meantime? So in the proposal of the action plan that I mentioned for the European Pillar of Social Rights, we have included one target which speaks about 60% of adult population in the some form of learning, adult learning each year. And this is, I believe, something that is crucial. So we do need to think which jobs, which professions are going to be lost, and think about concrete people, try to reskill them and upskill them in order that they can work on something else. But when it comes to the to the girls and young women, I believe we need to step up efforts at EU and the national levels in order to promote this true equality and really a union of equality as we see it, and just constantly remind women, young women and young girls, that they are and they should engage in the professions which are still considered, or which are not considered but visibly predominant by the male population, and also we need to combat not only educational stereotypes and not only seeing the role of public institutions. I think it's important to combat stereotypes in cultures, in tradition, in families, and really engage all the stakeholders, because without the support of the outside world, nothing could be done within the school systems. And then positive examples. I believe we should speak the annual awards, or biannual, or whatever. Whenever we show the women power, whenever we show that it is possible, I think these are the best example. And young women also need someone to.
Yeah, I was going to ask Julia exactly about this as well, because of course it's a good thing that you highlight the success of women, but I can think of too many examples where there's the Women's Award and it seems like a consolation prize because the judge or jury is so biased that in the end 90% of the awards go to men or teams led by men, and then we have the Women's Award at the end. How do we deal with this kind of communication narrative, and just in terms of the digitalization of post-COVID, Julia, like Katerina said, upskilling and reskilling is a key part of how we develop our economy. So in terms of digitalization, post-COVID, how do we structurally change this without resorting to the need to have positive role models as the guiding light for what we do? How do we structure this into the workforce now, post-COVID?
Yes, thank you very much, Brian. I think that Katerina was right. I also think that it is really important to increase the number of women in STEM and also provide digital literacy of girls. Why? Because more female digital role models are of primary importance in overcoming exactly the stereotypes. And I would also like to underline another important thing concerning artificial intelligence. And you know that I think that the presence of women as ICT developers job may also help to overcome the gender bias that may be included in the design of a given technology, and it is exactly what you have underlined. And in the end, yes, in artificial intelligence can also be very useful in the care sector and also in the public administration to help people, and in this case women, to participate in the labor market, but also assisting women in care responsibilities.
Thank you. Katja, we've spoken a lot about the legislative side, the proposals that can drive things here as well. Former Commissioner Celia Malmström, she calls on European politicians in particular to refuse to sit on panels, all-male panels as well. That's nothing to do with legislation. This is a cultural shift as well. At a corporate level, that's entirely doable. How do we change the corporate culture to signal that it's not simply that we have an example of a successful woman in power or in the decision-making process or as in terms of STEM research, but that it's simply not acceptable to exclude women from the forefront of business or politics?
I absolutely agree. I think what helps us females as well in the corporate world is the acceptance of diversity and inclusion on a broader spectrum. I think in the end for companies, and it's growing, it's not only about females, it's really about accepting that people are diverse, that there are diverse style of leadership, that there are diverse ideas, that there are diverse backgrounds. I think really the shift of this stereotype of male leader, maybe 55, gray hair European, this should be changing, and if this change, it helps as well the females to grow and to develop and to have better positions. I think diversity and inclusion, which is at the forefront of all companies, of many companies at the moment, and also within Zurich, helps a lot also the females.
Thank you. I'm going to ask our panel just to wrap up with their 30-second final comments as well. So, Katharina, let's start with you. Final word.
Well, my final word, besides congratulating to all Irish St. Patrick Day today, and putting the perspective back to women, well, I believe until we do have those three gaps, which is employment and pay and pension gap, we will have to step up all of our efforts. We will have to work harder, and we see some positive movements. We see that some gaps are being reduced. This is especially visible in the employment and the pay gap. Obviously, still a lot to be done, and it will take quite a long time that we see the consequences and that we see the positive aspects of the gap. But until that day come, I believe we will keep strongly fighting for equality in all its senses.
Thank you. As we know, St. Patrick famously chased all the snakes out of Ireland. Now we need St. Patricia to get rid of all the misogynists, which I think is probably significantly more difficult. Okay, Karen, 30 seconds, your word.
Yes, very briefly. I think it's good to look at what the EU does for gender equality and how we try to steer and promote. But really, my message would be, don't only look at the EU. Look at what you yourself can do as a state, as a city, as a region, as a village. At your home individually. I think it's really, in the end, it's a collective exercise. We can only steer in certain directions with the competences we have at EU level, but I think we need everybody on board.
Thank you so much. Stelios, 30 seconds.
Thank you very much for this brilliant discussion. Brian, I think that we are more thanks. I believe so that within some minds of our people that are watching us at this moment, I think that this is a key point, that we need to fight from any position that we are to create to throw down these obstacles between men and women on the work environment. So from the point of legitimacy, from the point of the company, but also, and this is the basic aspect, from the point of society, we need to find for this direction. Thank you very much.
Stelios, thank you. Julia, 30 seconds.
Yes, thank you very much, Brian. I would like to send my message, which is that women who have made it to top positions make a pledge to join existing mentoring networks in their own organization to enable other women to aspire and to work towards similar careers, or to help setting up such a network where it doesn't exist. This is for me a gesture of solidarity between women, and I also think that it can help change the culture and help women to made up. Thank you very much.
We didn't touch on mentoring today. Thank you. We didn't touch on mentoring today. I did an interview last week with a young Spanish aeronautical engineer who's now working in the ultra macho marine world, and she was saying mentoring was critical to her success, and she sees this as a key dynamic in how her career will develop as well. Joanna had unfortunately had to go, so Katja, last word.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with Julia, Karen, and Katharina and Stelios that the most important thing is that we have public-private partnerships, that we work together and collaborate learn from each other, share our stories, coaching, mentoring, secondments, everything. I think that's really important.
Thank you. I picked my daughter, my 12-year-old daughter, up from school just before I came here. I told her I was coming here to do a panel on gender equality. She said, can I go? Can I speak? So you can send a question. And she said, I don't want to send a question. I have a voice. And I think this summarizes exactly the role for all of us, that we all have a voice. And it's time that this question was answered and set aside completely. Men have no excuse not to participate fully, vocally, and to support this change that is completely necessary. So let me thank our entire panel today, Katerina, Karen, Stelios, Julia, Joanna, and Katya for an excellent contributions. We had a broad discussion. Thank you to our audience for the questions you sent through and all the comments as well. They will be noted and the social media team will respond to those as well. And let me thank our team here in the office, who you never get to see, but without whom this doesn't happen. Tomolto, Jacques, Simona, and Anna as well. I'm Brian Maguire. I wish you a very good afternoon. And thank you to Zurich.